So, as I was saying, these days, just making an improvement isn't enough. It's not enough. The idea must have potential for scale. That's another cliche that goes along with disruption. And it must have a moonshot quality, which can lead not only to awesome achievements, but can lift valuations rapidly into the billions. That's part of the mythology of disruption. And I thought, what better way of demonstrating that moonshot quality than to talk to a company that wants to do a moonshot. I'd like to invite Bob Richards out on stage. Bob's an old friend of ideacity, and I was thinking you may have the record for the most appearances at ideacity over time.
I should misbehave more this time. It's always a fun occasion. Thank you.
It's great. So Bob was on this stage in 2008 when he and Peter Diamandis and Ray Kurzweil announced the formation, the launching of Singularity University. It happened right here at ideacity. And subsequent to that, Bob got involved in this idea of becoming the first trucking service to the moon. I wanted him to call it the Ace Trucking Company, but they ended up with the name Moon Express. And full disclosure, I want everybody to know I am a teeny tiny shareholder in this particular effort. Bob has been here over the last few years giving us progress reports of the progress of Moon Express in pursuit of the Lunar XPrize. And this may actually be the last progress report because we are inching ever closer to the real deal, the launch itself. Take it away.
Thank you, Moses. And you know, Moses, you've been such a partner in innovation for this country and for lots of things that I've been fortunate to be involved in. And I should say that it wouldn't be Singularity University without Moses, who made the very first commitment of investment, which is where the track starts, right, for Singularity University. It's so great to be here again on the stage of ideacity, to be among friends. Toronto is my hometown. Always will be, always will be. And Ryerson is my home university, so go Ryerson. Today, I'm going to give you an update on the progress for transportation disruption, not on this planet, but between planets. And as transportation innovations make our world a smaller place and create the sense of villages and neighborhoods that continue to contract. Thousands of years ago, your neighborhood was those people you could walk to. Right. Then it became those people you could ride to, or those people you could sail to. Soon it'll be those people you can hyperloop to. And our sense of the world is growing smaller. The venture that I'm involved in now is making not just the Earth a smaller place, but the solar system a smaller place. The question is, in our expansion as a species, as we move outward from planet Earth, as we move the economic and social spheres of humanity outward to the moon and beyond, we become a spacefaring civilization. Ultimately, not a choice unless you want to put an expiry date on the human species. We must expand. It's not a question of if, it's when. And ever-accelerating technology is allowing that to happen. As we move out into space, ironically, we look back at our cherished Earth, and this is the place where every human being has ever lived, been born, loved. Every war has ever been fought, every argument, every notion of humanity has lived here on this world. And it was only by going out into space that we started to get a perspective. And one of my goals in the next few minutes is really to shake up your reference frame, to give us a new perspective on ourselves and our planet and that which we must do in order to evolve as a species. We humans have only set foot on the most local island in our planetary archipelago we call the moon. Our robots have gone farther, out past the edge of the solar system and into deep space, kind of about here. But Our instruments of robotic eyes can peer out into the universe with different frequencies and understand what's out there. And we understand that the vastness of the universe is so humbling. In astronomy, as my mentor and teacher Carl Sagan used to say, is a very humbling activity. It makes us feel small as we look out, but it also emboldens our opportunity to look out. And as we look out into the universe, we understand that we're part of a ecosphere, of a neighborhood of stars that are located in this collection we call a galaxy, the Milky Way, and we can see it if you look up at night. We can see that light in the sky. We're not even in where the action is. We're out in the suburbs of the galaxy. But we're just one galaxy, the Milky Way, and you can raise that music a little bit more. And as we peer out into the realm of the galaxies, we understand that there's not just hundreds and trillions of stars in the only galaxy that we are currently calling home, but there are hundreds and trillions of galaxies themselves in the realm of the universe as we know it, in the 15 billion years or so of the evolution of the galaxies, of the evolution of the universe. It's such a big place, and we're just starting to understand how it is. And could it be, in this vastness of time and space, that we are the only ones to have evolved intelligence? Is it just possible that all of this space is just us looking out, or are there other intelligences in this vastness looking out? Are there perhaps even other versions of our universe? Maybe we live not in a universe, but in a multiverse. So, here we are on our pale blue dot called Earth, peering out into this unbelievable opportunity, being humbled every moment, learning new things. It wasn't that long ago that we didn't even know if there actually were other planets around other stars. It was just a speculation of how could we be the only one. Now we know through robotic eyes that planets around stars like the sun are not the exception, but the rule. There's just so many. And as we learn about the world and as we move out, we learn about ourselves and our own planet. Our first excursions to the moon, over 40 years ago, taught us that we can do it, that these super heroic goals of humanity can be achieved. But even though we accomplished the moon landings in less than 10 years as a species, we abandoned them 3 years later. Between 1969 and 1972, only 6 missions with humans landed on the moon, 12 human beings with footsteps on the moon, never to return. Why? Because it was a question of superpower politics. It was about proving we were better than the other guys. We need to do it in a more permanent way. This image is the very last mission of Apollo 17. This is my friend, Jack Harrison Schmitt, who was the only scientist that actually went to the moon. And it was in Jack, in looking around, kind of kicking up the dirt. You know, we all look at the moon as this gray area, and it's kind of boring, but he saw this fleck of color, and it was kind of orange. And he dug it up, and he brought it back to Earth. And it turned out to be the first evidence of mineralogy on the moon that could actually have value of resources for planet Earth. So the moon, as we look at it today, is not a dead, dry rock. It's our 8th continent. It's a sister world to planet Earth. It's the next island just on the horizon. With vast resources we've learned since Apollo, through robotic probes, we've probably mapped the mineralogy of the moon better than we've mapped the mineralogy of the surface of the Earth, if you include the oceans. And not only are there vast minerals on the moon, but if you look at the moon with different colored eyes, if you look at it in different frequencies, it's not that gray, boring rock and terrain. It's a wonderful world with all of the precious resources that we depend on as a civilization here on Earth are there in the moon, because the moon and the Earth were co-born, right? Every crater that you see on the moon is an ancient impact scar of an asteroid or a meteorite strike that delivered precious metals to the moon, just like it delivered precious metals to the early Earth. But the more recent discovery that is the game changer, that makes all of the economics of lunar resources viable, as well as makes it a gateway to the solar system, is the discovery of water on the moon. We live on a water planet. We take it for granted. But water is like the oil of the solar system. The lack of water in space makes it so expensive because we have to take all of the fuel and all of the materials up from our deep gravity well of Earth into space. If only there were water in space, and guess what? There's water on the moon. It makes the moon a gas station in the sky. And NASA proved this to us in 2011, crashed a probe into the south pole of the moon where a lot of the water was accumulating, and what came up was this gusher. So we know that the water in the moon exists. Why is water so important? Not just important to life, but H2O, hydrogen and oxygen, is the basis of rocket fuel, right? So if only we could have that gas station in the sky, it opens up the entire solar system and eventually the universe to us. The gateway to other worlds that humanity will eventually explore, Mars and beyond, starts with the moon. It starts with understanding where the water is in the moon and what types of water are on the moon, how to find it, how to process it, how to utilize it. That's what Moon Express is all about. We're creating the Pony Express to the moon to go explore the moon. We're taking a Hyperloop to the moon with robotic probes. We announced our first probe in 2013. In 2014, we announced that NASA had partnered with us because we had invested significant amounts of money to create our own spacecraft. Not just governments, so only governments have sent spacecraft outside of Earth orbit. No private sector company had done so yet, even though there's a lot of commercialization happening in space. All the vessels right now that are in space are kind of coastal vessels. They're very close to Earth. What we need are the deep space vessels, the ones that go through into deep space and go to the moon. So we did our first test at the Kennedy Space Center, and I stood on this stage and explained that to you about 2015. Very first time a commercial sector had flown spacecraft that are designed to go to the moon at the Kennedy Space Center. This is a 2-minute highlight video of those tests in 2014 and 2015, where we were allowed as private sector entrepreneurs to go where only governments had ever developed spacecraft and try ourselves if we could develop these spacecraft. So I could have that audio up just a little bit higher, please. So when I was a little boy, as many of us did, in the winters, we would get in the car as a family and drive down to Kennedy Space Center. My earliest memories are walking around the rocket garden down there at the visitor center. And it was in the realm of heroics, right? Apollo was going on, and Captain Kirk was rocketing through the galaxy, and 2001: A Space Odyssey was there on the screens in the theaters. So I grew up as a child of Apollo that became an orphan of Apollo when that Apollo program was stopped. Now the honor of going back to that same Kennedy Space Center and developing private spacecraft that could try to accomplish these things that we dreamed of as kids, and this is what's happening. With Moon Express, it's not just about replicating the private sector equivalent of Apollo. It's not just about going and accomplishing. It's not just about boldly glowing. It's about boldly staying. So we have 3 missions planned in the next 3 years. Mission 1, land on the moon. Do what only superpowers have done before. Prove we can do it. Learn how to do it. Mission 2, we're going to head down to the South Pole where that water is. learn what it is. And you saw that spacecraft being tested at the Kennedy Space Center, that white stuff coming out that looked like steam. Guess what that was? Steam, right? We're actually designing our spacecraft to run on water. It's hydrogen peroxide, H2O2. Same stuff you get in the drugstore, just a little bit more potent. You don't want to put this stuff on your hair. Hair on fire, real thing. But when you put it in a rocket like this, it actually becomes rocket fuel. So we can use the water on the moon to replenish the fuel. For the same reason that SpaceX is developing rocket engines that work with methane, because there's methane on Mars, we're working with rocket engines that work with hydrogen and oxygen water, because there's water on the moon. So you got to get there. And we've contracted with another startup called Rocket Lab. So we're a startup betting on another startup, a startup that is disrupting transportation from the surface of the Earth into space, building really low-cost rockets. We contracted for 5 of them. The very first test launch of Rocket Lab happened from this peninsula in New Zealand. So you have Kiwis and Canucks working on rockets and spacecraft to get back to the moon. Who would have thought? That's pretty cool. And it was just last month that the first launch of the Rocket Lab Electron rocket successfully lifted up from this launch pad and made it into space. Not quite into orbit, but that's okay. Rockets are really hard to do. And we think by the second or the third launch this summer, Rocket Lab will have an operational program in time for us to be on the top of one of these rockets by the end of this year, sending our little Intrepid probe to the moon. Another thing that Moon Express has been concentrating on is, hey, we need a place to do this. What better place to build spacecraft that can go to the moon than down at Cape Canaveral, right, where the world has gone to the moon? And we were fortunate to be able to take over 2 launch complexes at Cape Canaveral, one of them being Launch Complex 17, the old Delta rocket pads, which was the source of the launch of the Phoenix mission to Mars, which Canada participated in and sent the Canadian flag to Mars in 2007. This is now a private sector location. This is where Moon Express is, these 2 launch pads. Developing, we've about 70 acres of oceanfront property down at Cape Canaveral. We have an Intrepid team of 50 engineers, and we are designing our spacecraft and testing our spacecraft in our field of dreams and reaching for the moon at Cape Canaveral with the great help from the US Air Force and from Kennedy Space Center and the US government. And it's such an honor to be back in that same realm that I was so inspired as a boy. This is the rocket garden, the very first memories that I have. And it's a transformation that's taking place. And the students that are in the audience today have such an amazing opportunity. You can build rockets, you can build spaceships, you can build moon landers, you can go to the asteroids. We're at the beginning of an era of exploration that is completely going to transform us, right? It's no longer just the governments. It's a public-private partnership. It's creating new frontiers and pursuing those new frontiers with entrepreneurship and innovation, and creating an economic sphere for Earth that expands outward. That's not just going to collapse when politics change, but there's economics involved, so it'll be permanent. It's our first steps as a multi-world species out into the universe, and we're living in just a fantastic time to be part of it. I hope to come back and visit you next year and talk about how our first mission to the moon, where we redefine the possible for the young entrepreneurs that will follow us and do the same thing. And we're going to have an amazing future together. And it all started here in Canada. I'm working hard down in the United States. And we're going to make a future that everyone can participate in. Thank you very much for your time today.
It's always inspiring, Bob.
Thank you, Moses.
What caught my attention, though, is something that Rob said, which is interesting. There are the scientific challenges, there are the engineering challenges, there are the financial challenges. Everybody forgets the regulatory stuff. Now, I live the regulatory life in the businesses that we're in, and you made mention of it, and I wanted to get this on the record because Moon Express is in competition for the $30 million Lunar XPrize. Moon Express, we remain the only non-governmental entity in the world with government permission to undertake a private lunar mission consistent with state obligations under the Outer Space Treaty. No other GLXP team or any private entity is going to the moon or anywhere else beyond traditional Earth orbit without getting a similar approval.
When I decided to blaze a trail to the moon, I had no idea I had to blaze a trail through regulatory and law as well. We're going where no lawyer has gone before. So there wasn't a framework, and we had to work with the US government to achieve the required authorization under something called the Outer Space Treaty. That's a real thing.
Yeah.
This is how we're going to cooperate in space. And so we've blazed a trail, and we had the first permission and the only permission so far. But we're working with the US government and hopefully other governments that this is not going to be a barrier to entry in the future.
But it's interesting that it has emerged as a bit of a theme. We heard from the speaker who spoke about urban farming. And again, the issues aren't scientific or engineering or even financial necessary. It's always moving the authorities to see the future.
Absolutely.
I had the same problem trying to launch much music.
Thank you.